everyone, and welcome to the inaugural webinar Wednesday series from the American Society for the Positive Care of Children. We are a nonprofit whose mission is to end child abuse through positive parenting, advocacy, and education. We're so delighted to have our guest, Susan Britton, today, who's a program manager from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Susan, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, sure. Thanks for inviting me.
It's an honor to have you, and we're going to start in just with a little conversation, then I understand that you have a few resources to share with us. So let's get started. So Susan, as you know, our focus is positive parenting. And so just from your perspective, I'd love it if you could tell me how, parents can use positive parenting strategies to help prevent child sexual abuse.
Sure. So I think one of the most important ways that parents can protect kids from child sexual abuse is to have open, honest, respectful communication with their kids, which I think is a really important aspect of positive parenting. And that having that open communication with your kids does a couple of things to protect them from sexual abuse. One is that it makes it easier for your child to come to you when something or someone is starting to make them uncomfortable, or they're not sure, if something is right, or if they're safe in a certain situation. And that's important because we see that sexual abuse offenders often engage in what we call grooming, which is they do little things along the way. They start to keep secrets with kids. They start to try to isolate them. They start to do little things to test boundaries. And, if your kids can know that they can come to you, even if they don't know if it's their fault or not, even if they really like the person who's doing it, if you just have that really open and honest communication where your kids aren't, scared to come talk to you or worried about what's going to happen, you have that kind of rapport with your child. That's really, really important. And the second thing that having that close bond and really good communication with your child does is that it actually makes it so your child is less vulnerable to abuse, because offenders tend to also want to pick children that don't seem connected to caring adults. Because that connection to caring adults, if kids are disconnected, it's easier to groom them and to initiate abuse and to do those things. So offenders are looking for kids who seem disconnected, and so by having that connection, you're deterring people from doing things to your kids. And like I said, you're also allowing your child to kind of come to you and help you and the child kind of work together to head off any situations that seem like they might be unsafe or abusive.
Can you give us some examples of, you used the word grooming. Do you have any examples of what that type of behavior might entail? Like, can you just share what some offenders have done in the past?
Yeah, so, a little bit of kind of what I mentioned sort of in the middle of all that was, they start to isolate a child. So say this is a teacher or coach or something, they might ask the child to stay behind after all the other kids have gone. They might offer the child gifts or presents, things to kind of make that child feel really special and engage that kind of relationship. And that allows them to kind of say, I care about you. These are things that, we could do together because you're so special to me. And then also just, initiating little things, maybe touching them on the shoulders a little bit more, touching them maybe on the elbow, and then moving up to hugs or shoulder rubs and those kinds of things. They kind of, it's a way to kind of work your way up to sexual abuse touches, making the child more comfortable with physical contact. And they're kind of testing, is this a child who's going to back away from me? Is this a child who's going to assert a personal boundary? And if the child does assert some boundaries, then, the offender might think this isn't a kid who's going to, be easy for me to manipulate and to groom. That grooming behavior, it kind of forms that relationship with the child where they are more accustomed to touch. It also, for some kids, can make them feel like they are compliant in the abuse. This is one of the biggest barriers we see to kids disclosing. In other words, telling someone about what's happened to them. Because it kind of makes the child feel compliant or culpable. And they feel like I allowed, this person to give me back rubs, and I knew I shouldn't have done that. I knew I shouldn't have stayed in his office after, practice or whatever. And so now this is my fault too. So those little things, and those are tools that offenders use, and they tell children directly that, you participated in this, you did this. And so all of those things are sort of part of the really manipulative things that sometimes offenders do. So those early behaviors that kind of build up to abusive behaviors is called grooming.
So it's kind of like they're just inching their way in, little by little, sort of playing a manipulation game with the kids.
Right.
And one of the things that really struck me that I think I heard you say, or at least it sounds to me like we all think about, or at least I as a parent thought about sexual abuse as like some stranger who meets my kid at the mall. But from what you're saying, it sounds like it's more people that are in their lives that they at least are acquainted with. So is that the case?
Oh, absolutely. That's actually a really important point to being able to effectively protect children. We all need to kind of understand and grapple with the fact that almost always children are abused by someone they know and trust. The data tells us it's about 90% of the time. It's a family member, it's some other caregiver, it's a trusted person in some way. And so when I say trusted person, they are trusted by not only the child, but also the adults in their life. So what that means for us in terms of protecting our kids is when we have these conversations, and we'll talk more, especially when we get into some of our resources we have here at the National Center, when we talk about personal boundaries, when we talk about things that are private parts being not okay to touch, and any of those rules, we need to make sure we're very clear with children that those rules apply to everyone. They apply to me. If I'm bathing you and I'm making you uncomfortable, you can assert that boundary, and it's really important to give kids examples with real people and to make clear to them that these behaviors are not okay and that it doesn't matter who is doing them. That's really, really important.
Well, you and I talked quite a bit before this, and I know that you have, is it 2 children, a boy and a girl?
Yeah, so, I've got 2. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just wondered, and I know this is kind of personal, but I wondered if you could tell us, I get it that you do this professionally, but what was it like talking to your own children? And can you share that experience with us, and just from the lens of a parent, not the lens of a program manager for the National Center?
Sure. Yeah, actually, it's funny. We get that question all the time when we're doing outreach events and training, because it's true. I know a lot of this stuff as a professional, but then I do take that home in my role as a parent. So I have 2 young kids under 6, and one is a little boy and one is a little girl. And I think a few things that I've done with my kids, come out of the knowledge I've gained doing this work professionally. One is that from a very young age, I taught my kids the proper names for their private parts of their bodies. And having a boy and a girl, obviously they both know the parts of the other gender, and that comes about very naturally. When my daughter was born, my son, was like, well, that doesn't look the same as my body. And so I don't shy from that. And I said, you're right. Your baby sister has different parts, and her part is called a vagina, and your part is, called a penis. And demystifying that a little bit, again, it gives my kids the signal. And if someone is doing some of those parts of my body, I can talk to my mom about it because she's comfortable with those parts. Those parts are just the same as any other part of my body. And then I give them examples too, like I mentioned before, concrete examples. So I talk with my kids about, I'm changing your sister's diaper, so that's an okay time for us to touch your private part. If you need help wiping in the bathroom, that's okay. But it's not okay for grown-ups to touch your parts for any other reasons. Your doctor can look at that part, especially if there's something wrong or bothering you. We might need to touch that part to see if you need medicine, but adults should not touch those parts for no reason. There shouldn't be any games that adults play with those parts of your body. So I give those really concrete examples. And then we talk, in an age-appropriate way about consent. And so when I'm tickling, like my son in particular, he wants tickles. He's like, tickle my belly, tickle my arms, and I think he sometimes kind of tests, these little rules, and he'll say like, tickle my butt. And I'll stop and I'll say, you know what? We talked about that. That's not a part of your body that adults should play tickle games. And so we stop. And it's like, even if, there's no reason why we should be playing games with those parts of your body, if it's diapering, if it's this and that. And then even consent with each other. So, I teach them if, I'll just pick on my son, but if he wants to like chase or hug his little sister and she gets a sad face or screams or whatever, I will tell him to stop. And there have been times where he said, but I just want to hug her. She doesn't want hugs right now. It is her body. That is her choice. And, and I think you can really extrapolate that obviously to adults and issues of consent, but this is where it starts. It starts in early childhood, teaching kids empathy, teaching kids, look at her face, look at his face. He doesn't want to do this right now, so you have to stop. And I will respect when you tell me to stop. expect you to stop when other people stop. So, naming body parts, talking very explicitly about times it's okay and not okay, especially with young kids. There are going to be times where their body parts need to be touched and moved by others. And so helping kids know the difference so they can assert that boundary so people can't say to them, but you're little, I need to touch this part, like giving them examples of why and when it's okay for adults to touch parts. And then, and honoring their ability to put up boundaries about how they want to be touched and requiring that they respect other people's boundaries. Those are all really, really important lessons to teach, even, when kids are young, and, things I've definitely had some practice with their kids.
Well, and I think and I'm not trying to speak for all the parents in the United States, but for me, just growing up, it was kind of a taboo thing. You didn't talk about anything like that. You didn't use proper terms for body part. I mean, it was just very sort of hush hush. And so I think just as a parent of 3 myself, in having those conversations, it might feel a little bit awkward at first, but I think the benefit of it and the potential prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? So it may feel a little bit awkward for me as a parent, but the underlying thing is that I think that's really where, like you're saying, it starts in early childhood and it starts at home. So I just want to encourage all parents, even if it feels a little bit strange at first, just keep those lines of communication open and follow Susan's advice about having some pretty distinctive boundaries and using the proper terms, and that we're all just trying to do the best that we can for our kids. And I think your advice is just fantastic. So
yeah, and I would say too, I think one of the things that has been surprising to me as a parent too is also modeling this idea that kids don't have to give hugs and kisses and stuff, especially to relatives. And we as adults, especially think about grandma and this idea that, if my kid doesn't want to give grandma a hug, even though that hurts grandma's feelings or makes grandma feel sad, he still doesn't have to do that. Because when we teach kids that they have to give that hug, we're teaching them that their bodies can be used for other people's benefit or other people's feelings and what other people want, which I get, to an extent you don't want your kids to be, polite and you want them to exist in society. But there's a really important precedent that is set when you teach kids that they should do something with their body that other people want them to do that they don't want to do. And I think we should be very thoughtful and cognizant of that as adults. And that's a huge shift. When I train audiences, especially multi-generational audiences, this is not, you're right, this is not something that comes natural to us. And there's sort of a, we just have to think very carefully. And I think too, your point that it's a little uncomfortable, I think what I would say about that too is, as adults, kind of our job is to be brave here a little bit, because offenders are able to exploit the vulnerabilities of kids and the fact that we often teach kids they should do what adults say. And they should always do what adults say. And that is a vulnerability that young kids have. And when you look at the statistics, you see that the median age of sexual abuse is 9. And that's because those young kids are really vulnerable because they're taught, you do what makes adults happy, you do what they say. And so the more we can counteract that by giving them agency around their boundaries and also talking to other adults. So talking to grandma about why we don't allow hugs. And again, not why we don't allow hugs. We do allow hugs, but why we don't hug when they don't want to. You know what I mean? And even talking to adults about, these conversations we have with our kids about private parts. Because again, when we think about prevention, we want to think about enabling kids to report, but we also want to think about preventing it before it starts. And one of the ways you prevent it from where it starts is putting would-be offenders on notice that this is something that your family talks about. My kids know to talk to me about things I have with the private parts. I'm very connected. Those are check-ins I have all the time. And if there's someone in my trusted circle who was thinking about offending versus my kids, they're probably going to say to themselves, her kid's not that easy of a target. Let me pick someone else.
Move along.
Yeah. So I think that's really important, and it is uncomfortable. But I do think, it's our role to be a little bit brave on behalf of kids because they're also vulnerable in that way.
I couldn't agree more. And I hope that any parents that are out there watching this or caregivers feel inspired by, your good example and your nuggets of wisdom. So, Susan, I understand that you brought some resources to share with us today. Do you want to go ahead and pull those up on?
Let me pull those up on everybody's screen here. And I'll start the slideshow. Okay, so I do want to spend some time sharing some resources we have here at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And if you're not familiar with us, definitely invite you to go to missingkids.org. There's a lot of resources, and I'll show you some more specific ones at the end. But basically, our mission is to find missing children, reduce child sexual exploitation, prevent further victimization. I like to highlight that last one's preventive. A lot of people know us from our missing child posters and our work around exploitive imagery of children, and we do a lot of assisting law enforcement on those cases, on intervening and investigating and helping kids who have already been victimized. But it is a big part of our mission to prevent child exploitation as well, and so that's part of my role as prevention manager. So this is just sort of a visual snapshot of a lot of our prevention programs. The yellow robot you'll see on the side is Clicky. He's part of our NetSmarts program, which is one of the very first, I believe possibly the first internet safety program, started back in 2001. And so we're coming up on a big anniversary for Clicky and NetSmarts. But you can see, and I also say on the bottom, our Safety Central app is an app you can download that has some of our prevention materials. Also allows you to take a current picture and some information about your kids should there ever be an emergency. But what makes us kind of different from other places is we have a lot of data on what happens to kids. Every time a kid goes missing, every time someone sees an image of exploitive imagery or sexual abuse on the internet, they send it to the National Center so that law enforcement can assist. But it also gives us this big national view of what's happening to kids. And so we try to take that information and understand what the risks are to kids and turn that data into prevention and into tools that can help parents and communities. I'm going to talk specifically today about KidSmarts, which is our personal safety program. It is geared for young kids, as I mentioned earlier. The median age of sex abuse is 9. And we see similar data on abductions and attempted abductions in the United States, is that that 10 to 13 age range is really vulnerable to those as well. So we figure for prevention, we should get ahead of those things. And so we do talk to young kids about some safe practices, some self-protection strategies. And I'll share as well, we also have resources for adults, because as I've already talked about, adults play a really active role in protecting kids, and so we have resources for that as well. So all of this is available on kidsmarts.org. Everything is free. Our presentations, our lesson plans, the videos, the tip sheets, everything is totally free.
That's awesome. That's what we like to hear, is free.
yeah, everything's free. So these are things like you can talk about these things with your own kids, and I'll show some tip sheets in a minute. You can also share them with schools or after school programs. They're ready to go, PowerPoint presentations and lesson plans and everything. So these are free resources. And KidSmarts basically teaches these 4 rules of personal safety. One is to check first. So the idea that before you take a ride from a stranger, go somewhere with someone, do something different than the plan. If you're going to go to the playground and then someone invites you to their house, you're going to check with an adult first. And this is a really developmentally appropriate way to talk to kids and not say like, whoa, don't get in the car of someone you don't know. Just check first. I mean, get an adult's help, and you don't have to, panic or run away right away. It's probably, the adult who's talking to you probably has no ill intentions, but you don't know, so you need to talk to an adult first. And then take a friend. It's just safer to go to the playground with another friend. What if one of you gets hurt? That kind of thing. But also specifically to child sexual abuse, we know that most abuse occurs on one-on-one situations. So I talked earlier about how would-be offenders try to isolate a child, stay after practice, stay after school, let's go to the movies, just the 2 of us, come down the basement, we'll play video games down here while everyone else is upstairs. We see that as very common. So if we teach kids, you really should stay together, stay with someone else. That actually reduces their risk quite a bit to sexual abuse. And then this tell people no rule is really applicable to child sexual abuse. And I've talked about a little bit already, these personal boundaries. So if a shoulder rub makes you uncomfortable, you can tell the adult not to do that. And that's pretty radical for a lot of kids. A lot of us are not good at teaching those personal boundaries to kids. And even we find as we teach this, we're continuing to refine our lesson plans to really help kids understand this rule, because it is very kind of counterintuitive for a lot of young kids. And a lot of us are not good at asserting our boundaries and kind of standing up for ourselves, right? That's a life skill that a lot of us are learning. And so certainly we can understand that, 5, 6-year-olds need a lot of support and a lot of help. asserting, I don't want a hug right now. I don't want tickles right now. I know, you touching my private part like you're asking me is not, is against the rules, or it's not something that I want to do, whatever. So this idea that you can tell people no, you can assert your boundaries, and you should do that, especially if something is breaking one of the rules that, we've talked about. And then the fourth one, to tell a trusted adult. So again, this goes to reporting, of course, if abuse has happened, we want kids to be empowered to report it to someone who can help. But we also want them to talk about, those little rule breakings or those little steps along the way, the grooming I talked about before. So if they know, say, that, with their soccer league, there's a rule against coaches and athletes meeting one-on-one in a closed-door office. But that happens. They have to stay after. There's something that the coach wants them to work on, and he shuts the door, and nothing happened, but that made them uncomfortable. We want to make sure that they know you should go and talk to your mom about that or your teacher about that, and then that person can help you, remind the coach of the rule or think of a plan to keep yourself safe.
And Susan, I want to jump in there because I kind of latched onto something there. I think it would make sense just institutionally, like with soccer teams or, after school programs, to have some rules like that in place. So for any of you out there who are teachers or program administrators, it might be worth thinking through, what would make sense as far as just established rules. And then that way, it seems like it takes the onus off the kid to say, look, I can't be in the office alone with you because there's already an organizational rule in place. So just a thought there.
Absolutely. And we're seeing increasingly that youth serving organizations are putting good child protection policies into place. A lot of this. And so that's really good, but it's definitely something to ask about when you are, taking your kid for music lessons or scouts or, the after school programs. Ask about, ideally programs nowadays have rules about 2 adults being in the room. So always having 2 adults, and they have kind of a plan. What if a kid needs to go to the bathroom? How do we ensure there's a 2-adult rule? A lot of programs do have rules about certainly not isolated one-on-one situations. And a lot of parents know to ask about background checks, which are really important. But you need to make sure that they're not stopping there, because we know that unfortunately a lot of these cases don't go to court and people are not convicted, or they haven't been caught yet. And just going back to this idea that offenders are people we know and trust. You can't spot an offender. So there's a lot out there that organizations should be doing as well. We have some resources on our website, missingkids.org. There's a handout /education. There's a lot of tools there, and one of them is specifically about schools and communities. So you can get some good tips there about what to ask for as well.
Fantastic. Thanks.
If you can't find that and you want me to send you a direct link or something to it, let me know.
Okay. Thanks.
Our website has a lot, and sometimes it can be hard to find what you're looking for, but I can send a direct link. But yeah, no, that's a good point. I appreciate your point. I think it's really important that we are not putting the onus of all this on kids, because again, going back to the dynamic, it's someone they know and trust. And if they are the only little voice saying you shouldn't do it this way, that's really hard, and that's not fair to put that on kids. So as much as we can, parents, teachers, coaches, neighbors, everyone's sort of on the same page and has the same rules. It makes our job easier as parents, because then when we talk about things like no closed door meetings, people know where we're coming from, and are less likely to feel offended by that and everything. So it makes our job easier in terms of advocating for that. But it does, again, send a consistent message to kids, about what's okay and what's not okay. So I think you're right. I think I'll probably skip this. These videos are on our website, but this is one of our videos about telling an adult no. It has an example of a little boy who doesn't want hugs from his uncle anymore. And so they kind of go through the kid telling him, I don't want hugs anymore. And then the uncle responding really appropriately, like, oh, thanks for telling me. We can do a handshake instead. So we have videos on all 4 of the rules that were in the previous slide. So those are 2-minute videos. You can watch them with your child and then talk about them. Or as I said, there are lesson plans and presentations that go along with them too. If schools or PTAs or anything wants to use these as well. I did want to make sure I highlight this tip sheet, because I think it's really good for parents. It talks about some of the things we've been discussing about personal boundaries, and kind of breaks down some of those conversations, even with word bubbles that you can have with your kid about, that you can talk to your child directly and say, I'm going to listen to you. If you don't want tickles like how I'm doing them, if they're too, they're too hard, they're too fast, they're in the wrong parts of your body, I will listen to that. And again, talking directly to other adults and being a good role model. So, when you do help them in the bathroom, you can say, I'm wiping you here because you asked me to, and that's why I'm doing this. And so these are really good bite-sized fact sheets that, you can read through and use with your kids and then share with other parents. That's really important. Print these out and talk with neighbors and classmates and other parents. Do you have anything that you want to go back to or talk about before I keep going, Tina?
No, you are doing great. I think this is fantastic information.
Okay, so a few more minutes. So as I said, everything's free. These are just some examples of what's on our website. The activities, games, lesson plans, posters, and if any of this stuff, if you really like these tip sheets or you really like the lesson plans and you want a bunch of them to share, with other parents in the scout troop or the class or whatever, you can contact us here at NCMEC. You can contact me directly or send an email to outreach@ncmec.org, and we will send you a box of tip sheets or education kits or whatever. If it's something we have on, we can, and they're printed on nice paper, and we can just ship those out to you. If you'll use them, we want to get them out. So you can print them yourself from the website, or if you want some printed by us, we will send them to you. And then just, looping back around a little bit more specifically to child sexual abuse, as I said, in working with kids, we kind of realized there were areas of this stuff that they needed some more information about, and we needed to be a little bit more direct, especially in order to address not just abductions and attempted abductions, but also sexual abuse. So we added 2 new lesson plans this summer, one on secrets versus surprises and one on uncomfortable touch. And the secrets versus surprises lesson plan is basically about the fact that we should be teaching our kids not to keep secrets. It's too confusing for kids to say this secret's okay, this secret is not. So what we've kind of decided, and other programs teach this as well, is that surprises are okay. So what we got daddy for Christmas, or the surprise birthday party, or the baby shower for your teacher next week, you can not tell about surprises. Those are things that make people happy, and it's for a limited time. So we're not going to tell your teacher about her baby shower next week because it's a surprise, but she'll know next week because the baby shower will happen. Secrets are different. Secrets, are things that you don't tell anyone, and they make people feel sad or they hurt people. So if anyone ever asks you to keep a secret from me, you should let me know about that. And probably nothing. But if someone asks to keep a secret with you, that's a red flag, and you should tell a trusted adult about it right away. And then uncomfortable touch is sort of obvious, but just that idea that if someone's touching private parts or just, tickles, rubs, putting you on their lap, just anything that makes you feel uncomfortable, and especially if they're not listening to you when you say you don't like it, that's also something you need to talk to a trusted adult about. So these are 2 new lesson plans that really delve into those 2 kind of aspects, and those are topics really related to child sexual abuse. And again, these are free to download, and they have scripts, so you could use those scripts just with your own child. So if you want to talk about this idea of secrets and surprises, you can print off this lesson plan and just read the script as if you were the teacher, or read it through and pull out some points to have a conversation with your child. And then I also would encourage, if you're interested, to follow us on social media. We're at Missing Kids, but we've also got this handle that's specific to Kids Smarts, which really talks about personal safety, a lot of the things we've been talking about today. So as we release new lesson plans or new toolkits, that kind of thing, those will be here. So that's at Kids Smarts on Twitter and Facebook, and then Missing Kids is our general handle. And then lastly, I just want to, I talked a little bit about NCMEC generally, but I want to encourage you all to, make yourselves, aware of some of the resources we have, particularly, if you ever need help, if you ever have a child, when we say missing children, we also mean children who have run away, seemingly maybe of their own choice, or maybe not. But any child, if you don't know their whereabouts, you can call us to get assistance and resources. And then we also have a cyber tip line, which is if you ever see an image or communication chat boxes or comments on websites that are inappropriate or possibly exploitive of children, those can be reported, and we really appreciate reports from the public about those. Our analysts are here 24 hours a day and 7 days a week, and one of the things they do is they'll look at those, and if they can, they'll forward information to federal law enforcement, but they can also use their skills to figure out like where a child, if you see a YouTube video or comments that are alarming to you, you can report it. And a lot of times our analysts can narrow down where that child is and report it to local law enforcement. And if it's a child that's immediately in danger, they can, again, 24-hour response. But they can also just, use that information to figure out how it connects maybe to other information we have about that child or a possible offender, and just do all that kind of stuff. So if you see anything, we really appreciate you reporting it, both to help the child, and again, as I said in the beginning, to help us better understand what's happening to children so that we can get ahead of it from a prevention standpoint. Missingkids.org is our main website. If you go to missingkids.org/education, you'll find all of our resources, including NetSmarts and KidSmarts, which I've talked about. And then those programs also have their own websites as well. So yeah, that's it. And there's my information if you ever have any questions.
Thank you, Susan, for taking time out of your busy day to talk with us about the resources that the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children is providing to parents and caregivers. I'd also like to take a moment to share some of the exciting new initiatives that the American SPCC is launching this fall. First, I'd like to show you our brand new Pocket Resource Card. This card is the size of a business card, and our goal is to distribute these to teachers, social workers, police officers, nurses, and so on. They can carry these handy cards in their pocket and share them with families or individuals who are struggling. The next thing I'd like to show you is our new Learning Resource Center. The Learning Resource Center is intended to be a curated collection of resources that are free to parents and caregivers. Our topics include positive parenting, bullying and cyberbullying, children's rights and safety, child abuse, foster care and adoption, and more. As you can see, we're highlighting our new Webinar Wednesday series. Today was our very first Webinar Wednesday, and we're looking forward to next Wednesday when we're going to talk about the art of loving nonviolent parenting. These webinars are free to anyone who wants to attend. All you have to do is click on the link on our website to register. The last initiative I'd like to share is our brand new forum. The forum is intended to be a community of care for parents and caregivers who are seeking advice or have advice to give. We hope that this will be a repository of practical information that parents and caregivers can access for years to come. Of course, all of these projects are made possible through your generous donations. If you're interested in sponsoring any of these initiatives, please reach out to me, or you can click on the donate button on our website. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. We're so excited to share this great information with you, and we look forward to seeing you next Wednesday on our Webinar Wednesday series when we talk about the art of loving nonviolent parenting. See you there.